the second coming of Christ. What does the Armenian Church say about it? Let's find out. The second coming of Christ. We hear about it, we read about it. In fact, it's scriptural. We've heard so many commentaries about it. And yet in the Armenian Church, well, you hear very little about it. Well, actually, that's probably because we're not listening. Every Sunday, we recite the Nicene Creed. In that creed, we say that we believe that Jesus Christ is going to come again in the same body to judge the living and the dead. And so we recite it, we say we believe it, but now what does that mean? Well, in our Armenian Church, we have a Sunday that is dedicated to the second coming. In fact, it is found at the end of Lent, and it's called Advent Sunday. On Advent Sunday, we have a reading that comes to us from the Gospel of Matthew. Our church fathers say, this is the reading that you read on the second coming Sunday. In that gospel, we see that some guy comes up to Jesus and says, Lord, what is the greatest of all commandments? You see, in the Old Testament, there are over 600 different rules and regulations. Moses took all of those, and we have the 10 Commandments. Basically, a summary, the 10 Commandments. So this guy thought that, well, let's see if we could trick Jesus and say, which is the greatest commandment? Jesus may say, don't murder, in which case we could say, well, what about this one? Or he may say, do not steal. And then we'll say, what about this one? And Jesus said, the greatest of all the commandments is this, that you love the Lord your God with all your heart, your mind, and your soul, completely. And the second of the greatest commandments is just like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. Jesus said, upon these two commandments, everything is built. All the other commandments, all the laws and the prophets are established upon these two commandments. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, and soul. Love your neighbor as yourself. Interesting. We're talking about the second coming of Christ, and this is the commandment that's given to us? Well, think about it. When we talk about the second coming of Christ, that means that there had to have been a first coming. And that's what the Armenian Church prescribes. If you want to be ready for the second coming, first learn what Jesus has taught. Learn his message from the first coming. Love God with all your heart, mind, and soul. Love your neighbor as yourself. If you do this, guess what? You're prepared for the second coming. A lot of times people want to tell us that you have to be prepared by doing this and that. Jesus tells us very clearly, you want to always be prepared. If you look at the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 25, there's a beautiful story in there. It's the story of the 10 maidens. If you look at what's the bottom line on this story, it's to always be prepared, always be ready. And that's why when they came up to Jesus and asked him, what is the greatest commandment? Well, you have to love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, and soul. You have to love your neighbor as yourself. Think about that for a moment. If you do that, then everything else falls into place. All the other 10 commandments, all the other 600, all the other 6 million commandments or laws, regulations are based on that because you love God. And so, do you want to be prepared for the second coming of Christ? Well, here's an interesting thing. Jesus says that day and that time, nobody knows. Not the angels in heaven, not the Son, but only the Father. He says, for you, worry about today. This is very important. This is very important that we understand that that is in God's domain. It's not up to us. God takes care of the universe. What we need to take care of is right the here and now. Our lives, our families in the here and now. And so, in a sense, to be prepared for the second coming, yes, you have to first adopt the beautiful message of the first coming. That is to love, that is to care. Because once you do that, it doesn't matter if the second coming of Christ is tomorrow, in 50 years, in 500 years. There's nothing you can do to bring it about. There's nothing you can do to prevent it. So take care of today. And that's why Jesus says so clearly, he says, seek first God's kingdom and everything else will come. Do not worry about tomorrow. Do not stress about tomorrow. Tomorrow has enough problems of its own. Seek first God's kingdom today. And that's what's demanded of us when we think about the second coming of Christ. Always be ready. You never know when Christ is going to come. You never know when it's all going to end. But what you do know is that God gave you something very special, a heart that needs to be expressed in love, in kindness. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, and soul, and love your neighbor as yourself. Go out there. Do the good that you're ready to do. Just like a scout who is always prepared, always be prepared for the second coming by loving and taking care of people. You see, the final formula for the second coming is given to us in the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 25. In there, Jesus says, I was hungry and you gave me food. I was naked and you clothed me. I was thirsty and you gave me drink. I was in prison and you came and visited me. I was in the hospital and you took care of me. People will say, when did we see you? Because you know what? If I saw Jesus standing out there, hungry, of course I would feed him. If I saw him thirsty, of course I would give him drink. If I knew that he was in the hospital, of course I would visit him. And Jesus said, when you do it to the least of my brothers, you've done it to me. So go out there. Help people. Love people. Take care of people. Be ready for the second coming of Christ by adopting what he said at his first coming. Love one another. Take care of one another. Give the love that God has placed in your heart freely and to everyone. And that's how we are ready for the second coming. And that's what the Armenian Church prescribes for the second coming.